Welcome to Simply Sarah. I'm Sarah Stockham, your host, and so pleased that you have joined us today. We just open up this time in gratitude for our sponsors, for Rima, who's going to be joining us, for Lamano Art for their incredible mural that they have provided for us, and then also for Danny Koch for his music. Such a pleasure to have an intro and outro by a professional musician, and then also the Stegner family. In this space, we're going to open up a conversation with Rima. And Rima Berns-McGown, it's so good to have you here. It's so good to have this space with you. Friend, how did you get to where you are today living in Nova Scotia? Because it's been quite a journey for you in Parliament and then being here and all the things that you are doing. You have your PhD. I could go on and on. I will just step out of the way and let you share, friend.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. First of all, thank you for having me. This is a real gift. I am so thrilled to have met you. You're just a beautiful person. And I think that the work that you're doing of having these conversations is such crucial work, especially in the times that we're living through. So thank you. I will try to be very brief. I was born in South Africa, and I come from a mixed background, and my parents left for Canada when I was 4 years old. I grew up in Montreal. I experienced both anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism growing up, and that in combination with the fact that I felt keenly being away from family and really needing to understand why my parents had made that move made me very aware of the need to be able to help bring people together across divides. And I think that is at the center of what's been at my life's work. I was paralytically shy as a child, and I wanted to not be shy. So my undergraduate degree was in journalism, because that's a thing you do.
Right? Why not?
And then I lived overseas for a while, and then I did a master's in international politics and economics at Johns Hopkins, the School of Advanced International Studies, which is in Washington, D.C. Moved back to Canada, got married, inherited 2 stepkids whom I raised as my own. My husband and I then had 2 kids, so I had 4 kids when I did my PhD. And then I was caring for them, editing a journal, and teaching Diaspora Studies at the University of Toronto, which was a really powerful education, because what I was talking about was, what does it take to belong? What does feeling at home mean? What does weaving back home with here home, now home mean? And these are lessons for all of us to learn as we grow.
Yes.
And also, I had students in my class. Some of them were first generation, some of them were second generation Canadians, some of them were many generational Canadians. But the question of belonging and creating community was really at the core of that work. Eventually, some of my former students asked me to run for elected office in Ontario, where I was living. And of course, as an introvert and essentially still shy person, my initial reaction was absolutely not, like, no. And it's a long and funny story, but they talked me into it, and they were also very gifted political organizers by then, so they got me elected. And I spent 4 years as the Member of Provincial Parliament for Beaches East York, which is a community in Toronto. I was in opposition, and it was a really fascinating 4 years. I grew to love the community work, the advocacy that I could do. I actually loved the work in Parliament, because I think because of the intuitive piece, which I'm going to come to, I was able to pull things together
Yes.
in ways that people who work in politics don't usually hear. So it was very gratifying to me that the ministers who were the government ministers who were sitting on the other side of the aisle would actually put their phones down when I was talking. And then they would say, "We always learn something when
Mhm.
you speak." And I really enjoyed many facets of the work. Um, One thing that became clear is that I've always been intuitive.
Mhm.
But for a long time, I mean, as a child, it was really front and center, this
Yes.
intuition. But
Mhm.
it also, because of the bullying I was experiencing at school, I mm, I felt very different from my classmates, and
Mhm.
the intuitive piece just made me feel even more different.
Right.
So I remember when I was about 8 years old saying, "This has to stop. Like, I can't, I'm having enough trouble functioning
Right.
in this environment. I can't also, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I was like, this has got to stop." And it did, sort of. It receded into the background, but it never really goes away, of
Right.
course,
Thankfully.
thankfully. And I would find throughout my life that I would have described it as having a hand between my shoulder blades.
Hmm.
Things that I always felt I was being guided. There were times when there were doors I was certain I wanted to go through and they would slam in my face and I would be desperately upset, but then other doors would open and then I would go, "Oh, thank goodness I didn't end up doing that." And this would go on and on. And I always noticed that I could get parking spots. I don't know if any of you have tried to park in downtown Toronto, but it is a nightmare. And I would always be able to say, "Okay, I need a parking spot." And there would be, miraculously, a parking spot.
Beautiful.
I never really thought about it too deeply, but while I was working in politics, I, I began to really hone in on wondering what was going on, because there were times when what I now recognize as my intuition was literally helping me save lives. Um, Very briefly, I remember one time I was knocking on doors for a campaign, not even for myself, for somebody else. You're supposed to spend 30 seconds on a door. Bang on the door, this person comes, and I hear myself saying, not, "Would you vote for my candidate? Can I count on your support?" But I hear myself saying, "How long have you lived here? When did you come here? Why did you move here?" And I'm like, "Why am I asking these questions?" And this person says, "Well, you don't want to know." And I said, "Yes, I do." And my brain is going, "I do?" But my mouth is saying, "Yes, I do." And it was, and I sat down on his stoop for an hour and a half while
Mhm.
he told me a story. At the end of it, I said, "You really need to see a therapist." And I
Mhm.
gave him the name of somebody. 2 years later, it was pandemic time, so everybody was walking around with a mask on. And I'm crossing a street in another part of the community, and a man comes up to me and he said, "Rima, you saved my life."
Mhm.
And he said, "If you had not had that conversation with me and sent me to see that person, I'm not sure I'd be here today."
Wow.
And that, in combination with all sorts of other things, I started being able to recognize when I was going to be in not a great situation if I did A versus B. And I could hear when somebody was telling me something, what else was going on for them.
Mhm.
Those intuitive moments grew stronger, funnily enough, in my time in politics. And towards the end, I had already been nominated to run again in the 2022 election. And I suddenly felt, you know what? I don't think I can do that. And I need to know what's going on with my intuition. So I started paying attention. I started listening to podcasts. I did some courses, and then I started realizing that actually none of it was an accident. None of it was coincident. These were things that were had the potential to be so intensely powerful and healing. So I paid attention. I told them I wasn't going to run again. I had started to really become physically ill from the stress. It was the politics of politics that effectively, and so I eventually, I'm now living on the coast in Nova Scotia. It's very, very beautiful here. It's very calm. I feel deeply connected to the land and to spirit. And the longer I'm here, the more intense that connection is. And
Yes.
I'm working as an intuitive and medium. And if you had told me 10 years ago that this is where I would be, I, I would have wondered what you had for breakfast.
Such an incredible journey into the world of academia, into the world of politics, and then into this space of being called apart into Nova Scotia in order to be able to do a different kind of work, a deeper kind of work, perhaps, but also in all of those spaces that you were connecting and having these conversations. I find it fascinating that you had not only studied about diaspora, which means a group of people that have been spread across in different areas, and that you were not only teaching that, you had been somebody yourself who had left an area, had come to a new country because of apartheid. And in that space, you had experienced it, but also teaching it, not necessarily from this of and how fascinating as these places, as you began to learn it and interact and listen internally, that you ended up where you are now doing this work of helping people heal past traumas, intergenerational traumas, moving back in their own lineages that may have lived in multiple different places around the world, and being able to come to a place of hearing and understanding differently for this space and this time. Did I capture it somewhat?
Beautifully, beautifully. And
Mm,
the thing that's fascinating to me is that the highways and byways by which I was led here are the things that allow me to do the work in the way that I do it. So, for instance, I did a research project once in which I interviewed one on one over 200 people who had come to Canada from conflict afflicted regions.
mm,
And the question that we were investigating is whether people import conflict. They
mm.
don't import conflict, but they do bring their trauma with them. And that trauma doesn't get treated because they see themselves as survivors and they don't see the way in which it is eating at them.
Right.
I have people who trust me to do this work because I have a PhD and I'm grounded in evidence, because I've had the experiences in academia and government, because I've had that experience with deep trauma.
Mhm.
People who wouldn't necessarily go to, who haven't seen themselves in a comfortable with going to see somebody who's too woo-woo will come to me because they see me grounded in evidence and they go, oh,
Yes.
okay, I'm willing to try to understand what this is,
Yes.
as opposed to just dismissing it. And that piece is really fascinating to me.
Mm.
And again, back to the hand between my shoulder blades. I've been led here, folks. This wasn't,
Yes.
I mean, I felt like I was blundering around at the time, but I don't think
Right.
it was blundering. I think it was meaningful and intentional
Mhm.
on the part of our ancestors, as you say, and spirit. And it changes the way you see the world when you start, and
Mm.
the way that you understand not just this world, but consciousness and the universe.
It does open up for a different type of conversation with different nuances.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
It is profoundly beautiful. And
Mm.
what's extraordinary to me is that it takes away the fear. You know, that 3 a.m. knot in the middle of your stomach? It's gone because because there's no reason for it to be there.
Yeah. This is a perfect place for us to take a quick break. We will be right back. We're going to say thank you to our sponsors.
I am the founder and owner of Lamano Art. I began this business over 20 years ago. I specialize in paintings of all kinds. I make murals, portraits, and live paintings. My specialty is color and also telling a story. Some of the work that Lamano Art does are calligraphy pieces, wedding invitations, sign work, and sculptures like fairy doors. I'm open to working with anyone on any idea. Please feel free to contact me at your convenience, and I look so forward to talking to you. Thank you.
Rima, I am loving this conversation because I remember being a child living overseas in Africa as well, and just having such a deep, strong sense of intuition. And there coming a point where I come to the States where I was like, this is too much. I don't know as a child how to integrate any of this. And I need for things to tamper down a bit so that I can just move forward and survive. And we were living in Michigan at that time. I was in second grade. And I remember overseas, this is a little bit vulnerable, and perhaps people will think it's kind of odd that I'm sharing it, but it's one of my experiences coming to the States and being in an American school rather than being homeschooled by educators, is that we had an outhouse. We lived out in the jungle, right? So we also had inside plumbing as well, but because we had water brought up from the stream being carried by buckets, and paying people to do that we were careful about how often we use that or when we use that. So that was part of the story behind this. So we had an outhouse. Well, in the outhouse, people would sing so that you knew somebody was there. It was just part of maybe humming or whatever, but that just let people know. All right, fast forward. I'm in American school in second grade. I am blushing as I share this story. And this is decades later. But I'm singing in the bathroom. And the bathroom happened to be in the back of the classroom. And I wash my hands, I come out, and everybody is staring at me. And the teacher said, "Would you like to apologize?" First of all, I didn't know what the word apologize meant because in the tribe that I grew up with, it was a different way of saying it. And this word, the way that it sounded, just sounded so severe. I didn't know what I needed to do. And everybody looking at me, I was just so astonished by all of this. And finally, the teacher said, "You need to say that you're sorry." Again, I'm happy to say I'm sorry, but I have no context for what I need to say that I'm sorry for. And I wiggled and jiggled. I don't think I ever said any of those words. But my parents were called in, and I was told that I could no longer sing in the bathroom at school because it was disturbing other people. But those spaces of coming from a different culture, perhaps feeling like you're supposed to fit in for whatever reason, whatever the context is, and yet just knowing that what you are carrying is different than how other people see the world, how other people interact, is definitely an area that you are speaking to as you are talking about your own experiences and having this hand between your shoulder blades, just gently moving you forward and helping you weave all these different pieces together. When you think about for yourself and have conversations with people who would not necessarily come and have a conversation with someone who is a medium or somebody who can help somebody really deeply work through, heal, come to a different place of understanding, and even the word acceptance of intergenerational trauma, of old things that have happened, of ways that the family interacts that no longer feel right for the person in this generation, in this space and time, what are some of the things that you do to help their skepticism move from, I have been hands on the hips at times. I've been told that this isn't okay. And yet I'm here. I've been led here and I'm really feeling conflicted internally. How do you help people move through those spaces to come to a place of being able to open up a deeper conversation?
So, first of all, I just want to say I have this really strong urge to go back and give your 7-year-old self a huge hug.
Thank you. I received that.
Because I've been there. I was, 4 years old, being like mocked by my teacher in nursery school for my accent. Like it was like brutal. And it just, that sense of humility, and shame that you feel for nothing you've done just because someone that understands your context is,
Yes.
yeah, I have many stories like that. I think the answer is to be able to have the empathy and compassion to meet people where they are, because not everybody, when somebody shows up in front of me for any reason, for one reason or another, sometimes it's because they've been taught in their institution that this is not okay. And it's actually taken an awful lot for them to end up in front of me. Sometimes it's got nothing to do with any religious institution. They're just very materialist in their outlook, and their healthy skepticism is like, never in a billion years would I have thought. And then something has happened to them intuitively because they've lost someone. And I had somebody, for instance, make an appointment. She came on a Zoom call and she was like sitting, like, first of all, like, just try to like,
Yes.
you could see she was there, but she'd been like dragged by herself, but like kicking,
Right.
screaming.
Yes.
Lost her twin sister, and this woman lived alone, and she'd woken up being fully awake, feeling her twin sister's arms around her. She had to know what that was all about.
Right.
In other cases, it's people who just, even if their religious institution, their priest hasn't yelled at them, they just feel like, oh, this feels like it. So what I always try to do is let the person very gently understand what the evidence is that I'm getting,
Mhm.
and pass it on to them in a way where they can't deny there's something happening. Because as I say, and my mentor, who's Denise Correll, the Grateful Messenger, as she says, you can't make this shit up. You just can't. There is no way I could be guessing. And that piece of evidence that came through was so specific to what you've told me about your person. They have passed that on in order that you understand that this is, Rima's not making this stuff up. She's getting it from somewhere. I don't know their person, so this is the only way it could have come. But I feel that the next piece is really important, the piece after that.
Yes.
Because this is not about, look what Rima can do, or look what Sarah can do, or look what some other medium can do. That is not the point of this.
Right.
The point of this is just to establish that connection.
Right.
And to start a conversation that is so healing. And that is where the meat of the conversation, that's where the shivers come. That's where, it, because then somebody feels like they're actually making some headway and things are shifting in a way that's really powerful and very specific to them and their set of circumstances. So that initial piece of evidence is crucial in opening up the pathway, if you will, and helping the person to understand that it's okay for them to be here.
Yeah.
And it once they can see, I'm not dismissing why they had that skepticism or that fear.
Right.
That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
There are reasons that we have those attitudes, that we have that fear. There are reasons that institutions set up those kinds of barriers.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, there's no reason for them to be there. And so once you start to talk it through, if you're very gentle and very understanding,
Right.
people are able to put that aside, have the conversation, and it does shift their worldview, their perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
it does help them to understand that that ancestral cord is still there. Our ancestors are holding us up.
Mm.
In fact, the the whole the point of this existence on this plane is not just for us as individuals to grow our souls,
Mm.
but for our soul groups, including our ancestors, to grow our collective souls, which we do by helping each other. And once you start to see that, then your whole way of viewing the way that you live
Mm-hmm.
and the way that you continue to relate to your loved ones on this
Yes.
side and on the other side can shift in such a powerful way. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just soaking it in, Rima. I'm soaking in your wisdom. I really appreciate how you talk about, and Katie Daniels, the beautiful being who introduced us. She was the first person to say to me, if you're seeing oranges or you're smelling oranges, you need to tell the person that you're talking to, because the oranges aren't for you as you are listening to their story and you are having conversation. The oranges are for them, because it's for them to hear that there is that what you are sharing is coming from a specific person. It's coming from it gives the frame. It gives the setting up the scene, so to speak, right? And it's not a world that I go deeply into on a daily basis. But now that I'm no longer 7 and singing in the bathroom and get into trouble for it, there came a point in my life that I also realized that I need to open up that space of intuition, that I was damaging my own current right now by keeping it dampened, but I was also damaging my future by doing that. And there just came a point where I said, okay, when I was about 17, I began to read books on self-help and self-care and expanding my mind. And I had been doing that for decades. And so why was I now at this point saying I'm not ready for this next space of spiritual education? And so coming into that space, when it comes in strong, there are times that I have really struggled to find the words to say to somebody when I'm sharing Reiki with them. I can feel that this knee surgery that you're getting ready to have has to do with a heartbreak that you've just had to somebody who's in college, who's a Division I player, right? It's difficult for me at times to find the words to be able to say, or to somebody else, who's a doctor. I can see the line of women behind you that it's stretching out, and so many of them are showing up. They're all showing up to say to you, we see you and appreciate the work that you are doing, but also know that the difficult things that you've happened in your life has also happened in other people's lives in this lineage as well. You're not alone. And so, finding the words to be able to say when we get these messages and see things. And I don't think that, and I'll let you speak much more clearly to this. I think that everybody has the ability to sense these things, to be able to engage in these conversations. But I'll defer to how you share as you teach people.
Oh my goodness, you're so sweet. I couldn't agree with you more. I think everybody, by dint of being human, we have these senses. I think one way to describe it is that we all have so many more senses than the 5 we're taught typically that we have.
Yes.
And everybody, or everybody I've ever met has had some experience where the phone has rung and they know who it's going to be. They think about someone and then that person calls them. They
Yes.
have a
Yes.
dream that something happens and then they see it happen. It happens.
Right.
Or you walk into a room, there's nothing there, but you can tell something has happened in this room. Or
Yes.
you're looking for a house and you walk into a house, it's empty, but you can tell that the people living there are not happy. You know this. You can just
Right.
feel it. We've
Yes.
all had these kinds of experiences. Many people, what's
Mhm.
fascinating to me is that as I tell people what I do, it's almost as though it gives people permission to own these experiences for
Yes.
themselves and not
Yes.
to just dismiss them as some weird thing that happened that they then don't talk about because they don't want people to think they're off their rockers.
Right.
And so when you start to describe it and you start to say, we all have these senses, it's just that in order for it to really be something that you
Mhm.
use, it's like anything else, any other muscle, any other ability, you have to
Yes.
work at it, you have to practice it, you have to lean into it. So I always say to people, start to notice.
That's
Start
good.
notice, keep a little journal and start to write down every time
Mhm.
something happens that you would otherwise be tempted to write off as a coincidence. And start to see the patterns and
Yes.
start to think about it. And the other piece is, of course, if you're constantly living in a frenetic environment where there's an awful lot of noise all around you, it's
Right.
very, very difficult to listen to those other senses.
Mhm.
Have to create, you have to recognize it when they're speaking to you. And so, because I do feel very strongly that folks on the other side and spirit, call that force what you want, is trying to get hold of us and to make sure we understand. But we also have to make that effort back. And if we're constantly going la, 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 and making as much noise as we possibly can so we don't listen, it becomes very difficult. So if you want to encourage it, you actually have to take the time. You don't have to call it meditation. You don't have to stare at a candle and go om, but you have to create that space
Mhm.
to listen to that to listen to what's going on.
Yeah. Somebody who's had an influence on my life, Alan Dogbutt, talks about how um, it death is happening all the time, right? We have a meal, we eat the meal, it's the death of the meal, right? Things are always, we have a day, we wake up, and then at the evening the sun goes down, it's the death of the day. We don't recognize how much uh, change is happening around us all the time, those spaces of loss. He also goes on to talk about how when we have a recipe that is from a favorite person and that we remember them, we feel their energy as we are making that recipe, as we are sharing with other people what we've made, that's allowing that person, that energy of that person to show up again in the family, right? That space of being able. So I think that also there is I completely agree with you don't have to sit, with a fire and, have a meditation going or anything like that. But there does need to be this space, whether you're out hiking by yourself or you're gardening or you're doing something where you have space to be able to hear and to listen. And then I think that we also have such agency to determine what we want to do with that and how we want to move forward with it. There are definitely times where I get nudges and messages, and that I will ask questions about it. Help me understand more. What do you want me to do with this? So it's not that these things come in on a silver platter and I go, oh, I know who this is for. Sometimes, of course, I feel like I need to reach out to a person and I feel it very strongly and like put everything down right now and reach out to that person. But other times it's a whole different, it's a symphony, and you have the flutes, and then you also have, the huge timpanis that make all of that noise, and so you have all the different timbres in between and pitches. And I think that some people are really good at hearing one of those or another of those, but to come to a place where you can have conversation with other people like yourself and be able to open up so that you'd be able to hear more of the symphony. I think that there's something inside of that that really just settles the spirit in a different way.
I so love the way that you describe that. I think it is powerful and perfect because you're absolutely right. It is like a symphony, and there are all these different instruments, and you might, for one reason, be tuned into the cellos and not the timpani, but then over time you can start to hear more and more and more the more you allow it to settle. You know, my mom transitioned to the other side on my birthday 22 years ago, 23, almost 23 years ago now. And of course, it was horrible when it happened. And for a long time, the grieving was really hard. I cried every day for 5 years. And I started to recognize that in the week leading up to my birthday, I didn't feel like I was completely connected with the ground. I started to feel that sort of floaty feeling you feel when you're connecting. And I started to recognize that I needed to take the day of my birthday and not do anything except be in that space. I now view my mom's passing on that day as the most extraordinary gift that she gave to me because it established a kind of, I don't know what word to use, whether portal is the right word, but it established some kind of a deep, deep, deep spiritual connection, which has served. My mom has been integral to so many of the key extraordinary changes and beneficial things that have happened to me over the last couple of decades. And I feel that my ability to sense my mom, and then after that, other relatives came because of that. And it partly came because I really simply had to pay attention to what was happening to me. Now I know when I get that feeling, I know when I'm connecting, it just goes whoop up the back of my neck, and I'm like, okay, here we are.
Yes.
And then I can hear those different parts of the symphony of the symphony. It doesn't have to be, the big kettle drum going boom over my head.
I am just sitting inside of this conversation and enjoying it so much, Rima. I appreciate that you work with people in person, that you also work with people virtually, knowing that energy is energy and that we are all woven together and interconnected. Can you speak to somebody who is knowing that they have some abilities and they have seen movies where it's been sarcastically demonized? They have overheard conversations. They have felt wildly uncomfortable around, in America, Halloween. That there have just been experiences in their life where they have really felt like it's just matted and stomped down any feeling that they have of this is a good ability that I have. What advice would you give to somebody who is recognizing that and yet also saying that they can't deny it? They feel really, really stuck in that space of the in-between.
It's fear, isn't it? It's
Yes.
fear of the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fear that they're messing with some kind of Pandora's box. That once you open it up, something awful is going to happen. It's like in their minds, all of this is like a big Ouija board, and if you go and start playing the Ouija board, you never know what's going to come at you. So, what I would say, I'm actually going to go back to the quote that I sent you,
Yes.
which was a quote that, because it is not actually terribly different from fear of people who come from a different background.
Right.
And my three of my four grandparents were Jewish, and they all came to South Africa because of persecution in Europe. My
Right.
fourth grandparent, my father's mother, my Granny Ruth, was born Susanna Johanna Riede, and she was actually from an Afrikaner / Cape Colored background. So the Cape Colored community was itself a mixed community of
Right.
folks who were Indigenous, Black, African, South Asian, and white, either Afrikaners, let's say Afrikaners. So she was from this mixed community, and from a very small little, she grew up on an ostrich farm in the
Mm.
Western Cape, 15-minute drive, never mind by ox cart, from
Right.
this town. And at some point, she was kicked out of her house after her mom died and her dad remarried, and she had to make her way. She didn't speak English at the time, and she made her way to Johannesburg, big city, where she eventually, after many years, and I don't know what horrible things might have happened to her in the interim, she met my grandfather, had an Orthodox conversion to Judaism, so very, very strict, and then lived the rest of her life as a good Jew and Jewish mother and Jewish wife. But my dad told me she always still used to listen to the church broadcasts, the Dutch Reformed Church broadcasts,
Yes.
after my grandpa left for work in the morning. And I never forget, she used to say to me, there is only one divine energy,
Mm.
and it doesn't care what kind of a building you go into to talk to it. Like, and it, to me, that remains the most profound thing that anybody has ever said about faith and the understanding. She had a strong belief in uh, the divine,
Yes.
divine energy, whether you call it God, or whether you call it Allah, or whether you call it spirit or creator or
Source.
Buddha. It doesn't matter whether you go into a church or a synagogue or a temple, or you simply go outside. It doesn't matter. And that is so profound to think that once you understand that, the kinds of things that human beings put up because of fear, for because they need to establish institutional power, all kinds of reasons that that stuff happens. But at the back of it, before all of it, there's the divine energy, and then there's us, and we all have access to it. And so I feel like part of it is just stepping out from behind the fear and understanding that when you also seek the light, the dark stuff's not going to come get you.
Right.
Like, it just isn't. It is, you almost start to, the way that some people put it is that you're just vibrating too high. Dark stuff vibrates low. It's out there, but it's not going to come get you. And the higher you are going, the more protected you are. Stuff. So I think it's important to kind of try to at least find out. Knowledge makes you less afraid. Find people who resonate with you, who might be able to teach you. There are lots of good educators out there. See what resonates with you. Start to read. There are tons of resources out there. And just see how, find someone to ask questions of. And then have, over time, I do believe that that fear will dissipate. There are people from every faith who understand this. So it's not a question of, it's not a Catholic thing, or it's not a Christian thing, or it's not a Jewish thing, or it's not a Muslim thing. Yes, it is. And there are people from every faith who who have worked on creating those pathways. And so when you're encountering that fear, there may well be people who are uncomfortable with it. But there's a way to get there, and there's a way to understand it and to see that it is actually not in any way contradicting the the pillars of the faith that you've grown up with.
I remember learning Reiki 1 and 2 and hearing that in Reiki 3 and 4 that I would need to use crystals. And the way that I was brought up, I just thought, I'm not going to worship something that's been made, was my frame of mind, and was so grateful for the amount that I had learned, knew that there was more out there. And being open, having a morning quiet time, I remember reading and realizing that Moses's brother, Aaron, had an ephod, and it had 12 crystals on it, 12 stones, right? And it wasn't that those stones were being worshipped, they were representing. And when I began to understand that the crystals were representing energy, could be used as tools, it totally changed everything for me. But I needed to do that internal work, be open, keep asking the questions. And there are things that I come up against and I go, don't understand it. And I'm not in a place at this point that I'm ready to put time and effort and energy into understanding it. And so I'm not saying yes to everything that's out there. But as I do the self-inquiries, I do look to the people who have written ancient things that have stood over the test of time. I find that there is solace in that. There is encouragement in that as well. And you're right, it's from people who have different ways of speaking, different languages, different parts of the world. And yet there is this commonality of having a understanding that we can choose to be very, very material if we want, but that we don't have to be. We can be spirit beings having a human experience. And I love when my friend Kia talks about that because it just opens up so many things, right? As a spirit having a human experience, what school am I in? What do I want to learn? And there are times where recently I was talking with somebody and said, I'm definitely have relocated to where we are. It's part of my spiritual education. It's what I'm supposed to be here because I have things to be learning here. And so as I truly thought that the last time that I moved was my last time to move. And now I'm saying, okay, I get it. In my life, relocating is a new book, a new chapter, a new educational experience for me. And so, yes, plant deep, but also be willing to release for the next level of education.
That is so true. And just to go back to something you said earlier, we live with we live with the death of the physical body all the time.
Right.
To learn to understand that we are spirit having a physical experience, and then to understand that energy doesn't disappear when someone doesn't need their physical body anymore, or there's some reason for it to have come to an end, that is continuing every time somebody that we love passes.
Mm-hmm.
It is obviously not a happy experience. It is a tragic experience. It is so hard for us not to have them as companions in this physical plane, not to feel their hugs, not to hear their voices, not to have conversations in the way that we're speaking now. But every time it happens, it becomes an invitation from spirit to open up the way we see the world.
Yes.
The way we see the universe, and the way we see our existence, and the way we see our connection to the other side. It is an extraordinary invitation. And one of the reasons that I think that mediumship matters is not, again, it's not a parlor trick. It's not a magic trick. It's not to say, oh, look what so-and-so can do. It's because when you've been told, do not do this, do not think that way, do not open up that way, it's scary, it's dangerous, it's sacrilegious, it's this, it's that, the other thing. When the evidence that is presented to you is so overwhelming from your loved one who also was a just a very devout believer in the church or the mosque or the synagogue, when that comes to you so powerfully and it's like, oh my gosh, this had to be my person. There's no way, like it's too specifically between them and me.
Yeah.
And that person is saying, I'm still here.
Right. Right.
Look for me, pay attention to the ways in which I reach you. And it
Yes.
can't be like this, because if it's like this, you don't go deeper, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's that person saying, come, like, trust in this and investigate further. And that goes back to the point that you were making about bringing all your faculties together. You
Yeah.
need your left brain and your right brain and your heart and your gut, because it's the discernment
Yeah.
that actually helps you understand what is going on
Mm.
and keeps you safe, and also helps you understand how,
Mhm.
what incredible gift and blessing that connection with spirit is.
I think it's also really important in my work that I can share what I have seen, smelled, heard, whatever that is. It's not for me to tell you what it means. It
Right.
is for the person to say, to get to figure that part of the story out. Yes, do numbers talk to me a certain way? Yes. Do colors speak to me a certain way? Yes. But that's my kindergarten vocabulary, right? That's my understanding. That's my ledger. It's my book. And so other people can see exactly the same colors, the same numbers, the same everything, and have a very different understanding. And that's okay as well. And so I'm happy to share um, when something comes in. I'm happy to have that conversation, but it's also still up to this whole place of agency, right? It's not up for me to say, and this is what it means to you, and this is how you're supposed to live your life. You've just changed one master for another, and that's not agency, in my opinion.
You are so right. I think this is such a crucial part of it, is that everybody who is even seeking to connect, everyone's going to do it in a different way. There is no one way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's so absolutely important that everybody do this in a way that makes sense to them,
Mm.
and that you don't allow other people to tell you what to think or how to do it or how to think. Like, nobody can do that. You have to be able to do it yourself. People can be guideposts, they
Mm.
can be resources, but always find what resonates for you and take it at your own pace, because otherwise it won't land.
Right. You're right. Ah, Rima, I'm hoping that we can have another conversation sometime, because this is so wide and so deep. I knew that before we hit record. I could feel from the bottoms of my feet and around just how expansive this possibility of this conversation is. But are there some things for this first part that you'd like to reiterate for our listeners?
I, I, I think it's been just such a beginning, beautiful beginning of a deep, deep conversation.
Mm.
I love you already. I could
Feelings
talk to you
mutual. Thank you.
for months. Um, I think what is important, perhaps, that I'd like to reiterate for everyone to take away is that we are living through such fractious times.
Mm.
It doesn't matter what anybody believes politically. What matters, I'm not saying that it's not a question of there being a wrong or a right, because there are a lot of people who are hurting, and they're hurting for very real reasons. And collectively,
Mhm.
we have to understand where that hurt is coming from. And we
Mm.
have to try to figure out how to move forward in ways that nobody is hurting, where everybody is being cared for and is finding themselves able to thrive.
Mm.
Can't do that if we can't hear each other.
Mm.
And where I feel that this work trying to grapple with what is consciousness, what is existence, what is the physical plane versus the other, all the other possible modes of existence, what is spirit, what is whatever you want to call that force. The beauty and the benefit of that and of the collective exploration of it is that I, in my heart and soul, believe that it can help to make us hear all the parts of the symphony and
Yes.
make sure that we're all thriving as we try to move forward together.
RimaByTheSea.com. Rima, I've loved this conversation, and that was such a perfect way of pulling all of the pieces together, making it relevant for today. And yes, let's do another conversation, friend.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a gift.
Lovely. And to our audience, thank you for staying to the very end to get all of the goodness out of this conversation. As you are contemplating your own life, or maybe having conversations with people who are saying, hey, I'm experiencing some things, I invite you to be inquisitive, ask more questions, to be there for them in that space also, to just take the judgment piece off and to listen. And as you are doing that, I just invite you to always take good care of you. Until next time.